I want to read to you the opening of my novel, Ashwater Valley, which I'm in the process of bringing to the world. Prologue. The day the valley drowned. Ashwater Valley, Connecticut, September 1924. The storm didn't arrive. It erupted. One moment, Ashwater Valley lay heavy under late summer heat, the kind that bent tobacco leaves beneath their own oils and pressed sweat into the hollows of the neck. The next, the sky split open. Thunder cracked so sharply it felt as though the ridges themselves had been struck. Wind tore down the valley in a single violent rush, bending trees sideways, dragging the smell of rain and metal and river silt through the air like a warning that had waited too long to be spoken. Naomi Hawthorne stood at the edge of Ashwater Reservoir, her bare feet sunk into the mud. The water had risen higher than it should have. It lapped at the shoreline with an urgency that didn't belong to the weather. It wasn't rain. This was memory. Behind her, her sons hovered close. Joe, 12 and already carrying himself like a shield, stood with his shoulders squared and his jaws set, eyes tracking the chaos unfolding along the shore. Nathaniel, only 6, clutched Naomi's skirt with one small hand, his gaze fixed not on the storm, but on the water itself, solemn, attentive, listening in a way that made Naomi's chest tighten. Across the beach, townspeople shouted over the wind. Men tumbled as waves surged where none should be. A small fishing boat, one that had worked these waters since before the valley was flooded, bobbed violently near the reservoir center. Then it capsized. 3 men had been aboard. Only one surfaced. Pete Graveshead clawed towards the shore, gasping, his arms thrashing as though the water itself resisted him. When he finally collapsed onto the beach, he retched lake water and shook so violently it took 2 men to keep him upright. Calvin Graveshead pushed through the crowd, fury cutting through the storm. "Pete," he barked, grabbing his son by the arm. "What in God's name happened out there?" Pete looked up, eyes blown wide, pupils swallowed by black. "Pa," he choked, "something." A ripple passed through the crowd. Not sound, not movement. Fear. "Something grabbed me," Pete whispered. "It weren't the boat, weren't the water. Felt like a hand. Like the whole lake wanted me." Calvin's grip tightened. "You lost control, that's all. You panicked." Pete shook his head violently. No, Pa. This weren't panic." The wind rose again, shrill and twisting, whipping the surface of the reservoir into a shape that made Naomi's stomach drop. She felt it then, not in her ears, in her bones. A voice carried beneath the storm, a woman's voice, Running Brook. Her cousin's spirit, dead since 1775, since Elijah Graveshead's blade had found her beneath the trees, quiet for generations, restless since the valley was flooded, awake now, calling. Naomi's breath caught. Calvin Graveshead turned, his fury finding a new target. "This is you," he shouted over the wind. "You warned us not to flood this land. You filled folks' heads with stories. And now my boy nearly drowns?" Joe stepped before Naomi could stop him. Joe stepped forward before Naomi could stop him. "Back off," he said, his voice young but unyielding. Calvin ignored him. "You cursed the valley," Calvin spat. "You and your dead kin." Naomi met his gaze without flinching. "I told you the land was not finished speaking." A wave surged up unnaturally high. slamming into the shore with a force that sent people scrambling backwards. Except Naomi. Behind the roar, she heard Running Brook clearly now, grief and warning braided together, rising through the water like breath returning to a long-buried body. The reservoir was remembering, and Naomi knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her chest, this was not an ending. This was the first breath of something that had waited far too long to be named.